Welcome back to part 3 of this lecture presentation titled Racism and the Visitations of the Gods, the Elohim, another perspective by I, the mystic philosopher. It is also part of my series of presentations called The Redemption from the Curse of the Black Spell, aka the Black Spell. Now, if you didn't or haven't yet watched part 1 and part 2, I humbly ask that you please do so before watching or listening this year, part 3. In part 1 and part 2, I set the stage for this, the final part 3. And so I highly recommend that you please watch part 1 and part 2. And in that order. 1, then 2, then come on to part 3. In part 1, I spent a great deal of time answering and identifying and explaining what is racism, its meanings, and its definition, etc. And as I've promised at the end of part 1, that in part 2 I will answer the question and share my perspective on reverse racism, which I did. When and where did it all begin? When and where did racism, all began? Let me begin by saying that from the mystic philosopher's perspective, the thing called racism and the family of all isms began with the visitations, or rather with the visitation, invasion and colonization of the gods, aka the Elohim, and their creation, their reformation of the creature or creatures called Adam and Eve in the place called Eden, or outside the place called Eden, then in Eden. Now I have noticed with much intrigue that every time within the Adamic race history and holy book, aka the Christian Holy Bible, I've noticed with intrigue that anytime we find stories, incidents, anytime we find stories or incidents and incidents mentioning or mentioning of their God, of the invader God and gods or Elohim, visiting or taking up residence somewhere, especially on other people's territories, we also find where it spells trouble, it spells aggression, disaster, sicknesses, death, waste and destruction for all the natives, the aborigines, and all original inhabitants of that land, anywhere they go. And just like their creator God, just like their creator and their God, the evidence has also shown, and will no doubt continue to show, that anywhere and everywhere they meaning the Adamic race and races, aka the civilized races of mankind, anywhere they go, invade, visit, colonize, take up residence, etc., we find where it has only spelled nothing but trouble, aggression, disaster, sickness, suffering, death, waste, and destruction for all the natives, for all the aborigines, and all the original inhabitants of that land. Nothing remains the same once their presence is felt. It is also interesting to note that according to their history, or according to his story, as recorded in his Adamic or his Adam's book, Adam was so-called made or formed outside the garden and then placed inside the garden to tend it. And I quote, "And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed." Genesis, unquote, Genesis 2 and verse 8. From my perspective, a careful analysis and decoding of this story, his story, Adam's story, the story, will reveal that prior to being created, formed, mentally and genetically modified or made into Adam, prior to him being made into Adam, the humankind, he was actually taken from among us. Or more correctly, he was actually taken from among our ancestors that were his then fellow natural native earthly human family, aka the pre-Adamic natural native earthly humans that were originally and naturally from our mother nature, that was living in nature, by nature, and with nature. A people who the alien, our people who the alien and invader God, Elohim, looked down on and saw them as being illiterate. They saw our pre-Adamic natural native earthly humans ancestor as being illiterate, simple, uneducated, untamed, uncultured, uncivilized creatures, undemocratic, ungoverned. They saw us as savages, as the wild beast of the fields. They saw us as the uneducated, barbaric, and inferior humans, etc., etc., etc. That must be dominated, that must be converted, that must be domesticated, enslaved, and eventually must be replaced, aka that must be replenished with their new creation. That's how the Adamic God saw us, or saw our ancestors. In other words, just like how we witnessed and have experienced and are witnessing and experiencing today these dominant, unempathetic, aggressive creatures of and their dominant, unempathetic, and aggressive God. And gods are Elohim, the descendants of Adam and Eve, aka the Adamic race and races, the Caucasoid races of humankind, etc. They see us, and from their false, lofty, and mentally deluded high horse, and claim to be looking us. They saw us and claim to be looking down on us, and are literally treating us as being their subjects, as being subhuman, as being illiterate, as being simple, as being uneducated, as being untamed, as being unlearned, uncultured, uncivilized creatures, as being ungoverned, as being savages, as being unwanted, as being ungodly, as being wild beasts of the fields, as the uneducated, barbaric, and inferior humans. They see us as blacks, aka as evil, etc., etc., etc. And that we must be dominated, converted, domesticated, enslaved, and eventually replaced. Also known as we must be replenished with themselves. They should replenish us. They get rid of us and replenish the earth with themselves. So before he became the creature, before he was mentally, he meaning Adam, before he became the creature, before he was mentally, genetically, physically, and spiritually modified, programmed, and named Adam, he was one of us, pre-Adamic and natural. Adam, or to be precise, this original human, before he became a creature of the gods or of Elohim and renamed Adam, was then taken from among his people like a wild horse that is taken from the wild, aka taken from nature, which is its natural habitat, and then reformed or remolded and then placed in the garden, which from my perspective represents the master's mansion and plantation, to faithfully, diligently, and dutifully served or dutifully slave. This creature called Adam was created to be nothing but a slave. In fact, and according to his history and holy book, he was and is the first recorded slave to set foot upon this, our planet and Mother Earth. For the record, our ancestors, aka the pre-Adamic humans, were not slaves. And quite unlike what most people think, that Adam were created to just walk around in some beautiful and aesthetic garden and eat fruits and have sex. Not at all. He was created to be a slave to his creator, a slave to his master and God, to his Elohim. He was created to do the will of his God. That's the purpose of Adam's creation. Now please note that I said that Adam was not literally formed out of the ground, but that he was reformed, which to me means that he was taken from the lowest level in terms of the system status, nobility, and recognition, and elevated by the Lord through mental conditioning to become cultured, to become refined, meaning being trained to speak like the gods, the Elohim, to speak like the and speak to the gods or to the Elohims and with the gods, and being placed in a fancy suit and bow tie in order to serve the Lord in gladness and come into their presence, serve the Elohims with gladness and come into their presence looking good. He was remade and reformed in the image and likeness of the invader, of the conqueror, and the occupier God's system, tradition, and culture. The same is true to this day, where we see some of our own melaninated people that are remade, reformed, trained, educated, certified, and conditioned, etc., etc., by the system to become unempathetic, to become unconscionable, to become unfair, to become unreasonable, to become uncaring, and to become even far more desperately wicked and merciless towards us, their own melaninated people, than the Adamic race and races and the Adamic God and gods themselves that reformed and remold and remade them. We see some of them as the system's educated, trained, and certified black collaborators, black informers, black civil servants, and black employees. We see them as some of the system's black educators, black preachers, black scholars, black presidents, especially those of the so-called black countries. We see them as some of the system's black professionals, black doctors, black politicians, black police equal force officers, the black agents of force, black lawyers, black prosecutors, black judges, you name them, and by their fruits you shall and can know them. And And for those truth seekers among us today that really and truly want or will to know the truth about who were the ones among us that sold our African ancestors into slavery, that sold and handed us over to the Adamic God and gods and the Adamic race and the Adamic races, our enemies back then. And who are the ones, we want to know who are the ones that are to this present day, this very moment, that are still selling us out to the Adamic gods and the Adamic races, the Caucasoid, the Caucasians, to selling us out to the Caucasians, to the Arabs, to the Chinese. They are all those that I have just mentioned above. And their wicked seeds and their heirs and successors. If you doubt what I am saying to you, especially on this matter, then just simply trace back the lineage. Just simple trace back the lineage of most of these so-called black leaders on the continent of our mother Africa. And also those of the lineages of those of the leaders of the so-called black leaders in the Caribbean countries and elsewhere in the world that have sold us out and are selling us out to our colonizers and oppressors. And I can assure you that you will discover that they are the literal seeds of their treasonous collaborator African ancestors that sold our most honorable African ancestors to their enemies. Remember that the leaves does not fall far from the trees. But more on this at another time. Please, let me repeat who and what they are for emphasis. They are some, if not all, of the Adamic systems, educated, trained, and certified black collaborators, black informers, black civil servants, and black employees, black educators, black preachers, black scholars, black presidents, especially those of our so-called black countries, black professionals, black doctors, black politicians, black police officers, the black agents of force, black lawyers, black prosecutors, black judges, you name them. And again, by their fruits you shall, and by their fruits you will know them. Activated common sense will affirm that it was not and that it is not our common or our ordinary African brothers and sisters that screwed our ancestors over back then. It was not them. It was not the ordinary people. And it is still not our ordinary fellow African brothers and sisters that are screwing us over right now, today. But that it was and that it is those that have and those that have been reformed, trained, educated, certified, positioned in strategic position of the system and in the system by our enemies to do their bidding, to do our enemies' bidding, that for them to obey, to serve and protect the status quo. But I will have much more to say on this point at another time. In fact, when all things are considered, I must admit that I myself am not 100% natural, native, earthly human, because the Lord God and his companions have domesticated us all. To be honest, if or when all things are considered, it would be either very stupid or highly hypocritical of me to be claiming to be 100% natural, native, earthly human while I am sitting in my air-conditioned home office with almost all its most modern technologies and facilities, and while typing away on my high-speed computer and surfing the worldwide web and is speaking in my enemy's language, etc. The truth is that, with the exception of a few true remnants that might be living in some of the most remote jungles in the world. Those that the explorers, the missionaries, the servants of the Lord have not yet discovered, have not yet rooted out, have not yet vaccinated, immunized, and converted to some of the Lord's religions and political system. We have all been taken out of our natural habitat and have since become domesticated, tamed, dumbed down, civilized and sophisticated slaves and consumers for our enemies and their God and gods. The first evidence of these facts, that Adam was a creature and that he and his descendants were created by the Adamic God, or by the Adamic God and Elohim, to subdue, for the purpose to subdue, to dominate, to colonize, to enslave, to exterminate, and then to replace us, the earth's natural native, earthly human, the earth's original and organic and highly melanated human, to replace us and to exterminate us, can be readily seen in the said Adamic race history and holy book and its genealogy, the Adamic history and genealogy book called the Christian Holy Bible, where in the book called Genesis chapter 1 and verse 26 to 28, and I'm reading from the King James Version, reread, and I quote, "And God said, let us make man in our own image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowls of the air, and over the cattle, and over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God created mankind in his, or this is the King James Version, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over it, and rather have a dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. Unquote. This is racism. This is where it started, right here in Genesis chapter 1, 26 to 28. This that I've just read. The creation of mankind. The New International Version make it plain. God created mankind, not man. The reader might be interested to learn that the word God here in the 26th verse in this translation from the Hebrew, it's from the Hebrew word Elohim, which is the plural of the word El. From my perspective, if these scriptures and translations are true and authentic, meaning that these events did actually took place, it can and it must be interpreted as the head God and overlord, also known as Yahweh, talking to his fellow co-lords about an assignment that together they must undertake. According to the Bible, he said, let us make man, and more correct, let us make mankind in our image, after our likeness. Notice that he did not say to his comrades, let us make a thing and then call it man. And for whatever reason or for doing what? He didn't say let us make a thing called man. And for whatever reason and reason whatsoever, for what? This statement is very self-evident that man, or the thing we commonly call man, was already here and in existence upon the earth. The only difference from my perspective is that from the Elohim perspective, man, or the natural, our ancestors, the natural native earthly humans, back in the pre-Adamic era, before Adam era, and in their natural state of existence did not meet the requirements and qualifications of the Elohim to carry out their duties, to carry out the duties of the gods, and to be as evil, malicious, viciously cold, and inhuman, etc., like them. This, as you shall, or as you may see later, that the natural native earthly humans were not considered so-called civilized, cultured, seductive, and as vicious and desperately wicked as the aliens or as the Elohims are. The fact is that the natural native earthly human for hundreds of thousands of years were both earthly and naturally living and coexisting with all other fellow natural native earthlings, and in accordance with their mother and source Mother Nature and her natural laws, wisdom, and principles. Their minds were not heavily minded or like the gods of the heavens, and as such, Elohim, the invaders, aggressors, occupiers, and colonizers, arbitrarily decided that these natural native earthly humans needed progress and development. They needed civilization, they needed politics, and particularly the thing now called democracy, religion, conversion, and transformation. In other words, they needed to be born again and to be saved. The humankind called Adam, after being created, more correctly, after being converted, saved, born again, aka reformed by God and his host of Elohim, and his host Elohim, would soon discover that his natural native earthly ancestors and fellow humans were nothing but uncivilized barbarians, brutes, savages, cannibals, and beasts that must be replaced or replenished with his new Adamic stock at any and at all cost. And as you can see here in verse 27, that after Elohim had finished his makeover and complete transformation of Adam and his wife Eve, that from thence they went forth fulfilling the Elohim's will and command, which is to go forth and become Eve the multiplier and Adam the conqueror, Adam the dominator, the enslaver, the murderer, the malignant cancer, etc., that he and his descendants are and have been upon the earth ever since. Verse 28, and God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowls of the air, and over everything that moveth upon the earth. Now please note that this was the first time please note that this was the first time from any written records that I am personally aware of that the earth and her inhabitants saw and began to experience the doctrine and philosophy of colonization, the doctrine and philosophy of domination, subjugation, slavery, exploitation, genocide, government, equal mind control, racism, the family of isms, and all the evils that were to follow them and into our present day. It all started here. This is the book, again I quote, this is the book of the generations of Adam, in the day that God created man, or mankind. In the likeness of God made he him, male and female created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam, in the day when they were created. Unquote. Genesis 5:1-2, It is also very interesting to note that according to the scriptures, when God created or when God reformed, this Elohim, this invader, reformed man or reformed male and female, he named them both Adam. In fact, according to the scriptures, we read that the original name given to the female by the man, the original name was given to the female by the man called Adam when he awoke and regained consciousness after his surgery and possible anesthesia was woman. That was the original name he gave her, woman. And I quote, and the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Genesis, unquote, Genesis 2:21-24. It was Adam and not God or Eve who later named the female Eve. God called him Adam. This God called him Adam. Anyway, I'm not here to teach, give a Bible lesson. I'm just trying to show you the reference. The whole objective here is to show you where racism started. And it's right here in the book called the Holy Book, the Adamic Race History and Holy Book that I've just quoted. I've dealt with this in more detail elsewhere and in discussions. So now you know, my people, now you know the rest of the story. Yes, my people, now you know the rest of the story. That the wicked, the evil ideology, philosophy, and practice of this thing called racism and the family of isms all began on this, our planet and Mother Earth, with the unwelcome visitation, invasion, aggression, and colonization of our Mother Earth by the alien interplanetary invader gods, aka Elohim, and his or their creation, aka their genetic mixing, their breeding, their interbreeding, their crossbreeding, their genetic manipulation, and their mental, spiritual, and physical reforming of the man that later became the humankind called Adam and his wife Eve around the place called Eden. And that racism, continued to this day through his descendants, aka the Adamic race and races, the so-called chosen race, who Charles Darwin, one of their own, also called the civilized races of man. So thanks to the Holy Book, aka the Adamic Race History and Holy Book, now you know and understand that these Caucasoid racists and their fellow racists are just simple manifesting their created destiny, because they were and they are created to think that way and to behave that way. The fact is that they just can't help themselves or do otherwise. The leopard cannot change their spots, for until their end come, and come it will, we, the Earth's original organic and natural native humans, identifiable by our highly enriched melanin/carbon skin, will simply have to just put up with them and learn to survive with them around. So this is the end of this lecture presentation, titled Racism and the Visitations of the Gods, the Elohim, another perspective by I, the Mystic Philosopher, from the redemption of the curse of the black spell, aka the black spell. Thanks for your patience and your time spent listening and watching this, and so far to the end. And your comments, your questions and feedback, or feed forward, are encouraged. For more thought-provoking insights and perspectives and many other topics, I hereby invite you to please check out the rest of my uploaded videos, podcasts, and blog posts at www.themysticp.com and my YouTube channel called The Right Number. And again, I ask you also to check out my CDs, my music, my Messages in Song CDs, or Messages in Song music. The link is right here, will be given right here in the descriptions, in the comment, rather, the description section. I humbly ask that you please join me for another of my lecture presentation in this my ongoing series titled The Myth. The series is titled The Redemption from the Curse of the Black Spell, but my next presentation that I will be coming with is called The Myth of White Supremacy and White Supremacy-ism Exposed, version 2. Another perspective by I, the Mystic Philosopher. I am the Mystic Philosopher. It is high time for reason and for reasoning. Ashe, 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 I say.